Hello and welcome back to Lesson Planning. This is Ashley Doty, and you've joined me for Lesson Planning Part 2, Lesson Planning in 5 Steps. First thing you're going to need to do is locate your lesson plan template prior to this PowerPoint. Whatever template your school uses or that your building leaders require you to use for the subjects or grades that you teach. If you've not located those, please pause the video now and make sure that you have a copy of those handy for the activity at the end of this session. All right, hopefully you have your lesson plan template somewhere nearby so that you can compare these 5 lesson planning steps to the lesson plan template that your school requires. The first thing that you want to do in writing your lesson plans is establish the lesson's purpose. Remember that this should be centered on specific goals that are clear, concise, and achievable. Please don't forget, though, that they need to have high expectations. They should also include academic and social goals. Think about, what will success look like? How will I know my students are successful at whatever the objective was for this lesson? Make sure that you create the check for understanding before moving on. Checks for understanding might look like a simple exit ticket that's paper pencil. Maybe it's an electronic quiz. Maybe they have to write something or have something where they present or discuss. Whatever it is, make sure before you continue on with writing your lesson plan that you already have an idea of what the check for understanding, the criteria for success, will look like before you start building the lesson. Number 2, create a plan for introducing the lesson. Establish the academic focus and prepare students for the content. Tell them what they're learning today and why. Prepare students to work together. Set the behavioral expectations. Again, set expectations. I just want to review these 2 things before we move on. First, we want to establish the lesson's purpose prior to actually writing the steps in the lesson plan. This is so that you're making sure you're leading your students to success in learning and not just teaching and presenting. You want to have what the measure for success will look like before starting to write the lesson, such you are leading your students to success. When you start creating your plan, you're going to start with introduction, where you will establish the focus for your students, prepare them to work together, and set expectations. Step 3, make decisions regarding how you will facilitate the lesson, such as this is the main content or the meat of your lesson plan. Where will you spend most of your time in the lesson, Are you going to spend most of the time in the beginning, in the middle, and the end? Where do you anticipate some struggle points? Which part of your lesson are you going to introduce to the entire group, to a small group, or to independent? Which part of the work that the student is doing is done whole group, small group, or independent practice? Again, anticipate where they might struggle, and then push it one step further. What will you do if they struggle? What's your backup plan to reteach or reinforce? Step 5, or part 5 of 3, how will the class transition between different parts of the lesson? So for example, when you move from whole group to maybe small group, how will you transition them successfully? What new expectations might you have to set? Similarly, when you're transitioning from small group to independent practice, what expectations or new expectations will you set for the class to make sure they are successful? Step 4, decide how students will share and reflect on their work. Make sure to plan to debrief the academic. So who will share and for how long? I think this step 4 is often missed in a lot of lesson plans. Oftentimes we forget to wrap up the work. Also plan to debrief the social, sharing how we work together. One of my favorite things to do is to have students reflect on their contribution today, or maybe it's on their focus. So let's recap this slide together. Step 3 is where most of the meat comes. This is the main content. Determine where you will spend most of your time teaching during this part, or live instructing. What is the whole group, small group, or independent instruction and practice? Where might they struggle? And then what will you do when that happens? Lastly, do not forget about the expectations. How will the class transition to different parts of the lesson? This is true regardless of which grade level or what age the students are that you teach. Step 4, decide how the students are going to share and reflect on their work at the end of the lesson. Finally, step 5 of writing your lesson plan is one last review. This is where you go through and make sure you've included all the important elements, but also are starting to infuse engagement strategies and higher order thinking questions. So 1, revise for time. Where do we want to spend the most of our time? Where might we have to cut? So if you end up being short on time, where might you cut from? Did you plan something too long? Revise for time. Step 2 of the review, revise for the struggle. Look over their work, review conference notes, consider how they struggled and why. So again, how will you plan for when the students might struggle? Revise what to say, reduce your words. Oftentimes as teachers, we talk way more than we need to. I think of it as economy of language. Reduce the number of words that you'll be saying when you introduce or teach the content. Step 4, this is probably one of my favorites, revise what to ask. Check for rigor. There has been a rigor PDF that has been aligned to this session. It is in the Schoology folder for the lesson planning piece of the education model. Be sure to check that out. There are rigorous questions aligned to each part of teaching a lesson plan. Obviously, you wouldn't choose them all. You'll see what I mean when we get to it. But it's great to make sure that you've got at least one higher order thinking question, one rigorous question in each section of your lesson plan. Resources that you might need. Lesson planning components. But always start with the standard or objective and the check for understanding. Increasing rigor throughout the lesson. Again, just choose 1 to 3 areas to add in high rigor questions. In the Schoology folder, again, you're going to find the rigor questions provided to you as a resource. You're also going to see one handout that has all 5 of these steps listed together that you can sort of think of as a checklist. But I want to remind you, you're obviously going to start with whatever standard that aligns to your IFC. Now is going to be your time to practice. You're going to create a lesson plan based on anything you want, as long as you go through each of the 5 steps. My recommendation is to choose a standard that you're going to be teaching soon, such as one that you'll be teaching tomorrow or next week. Maybe it's a social emotional learning component, or maybe it's a procedure or routine that you know you're going to need to teach when you enter the classroom. For the purposes of today and practice, keep it simple. Just get comfortable going through the steps. You'll continue to get better at writing your lesson plans with your resources in hand. Thank you for joining me again today. Please take a moment now to stop, head into your Schoology folder and locate the 5 steps of the lesson planning process, as well as your rigor questions. Then you're going to take some time. Please take no more than 30 minutes to create your first lesson plan. Keep it simple, keep it short. I'll see you next time. Thank you.